Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Jeff Smith here in the Eyewitness News Weather Center as we're tracking the tropics and more particularly Hurricane Dorian, which promises to strengthen a lot during the next couple of days. And this could be a major hurricane making landfall along the Florida coastline as we head into the day on Labor Day. Right now, kind of in a steady state. It hasn't strengthened a whole lot during the past 12 to 24 hours. Winds are about 85 miles per hour. It's moving northwest at 13. Doesn't look terribly impressive on the satellite picture, but I think as it moves off to the north and west into a more favorable environment for intensification, this satellite will look a lot prettier. Not so pretty for the state of Florida because they're going to be dealing with a lot of devastation if it comes in as forecast, but it will look very classic, I think, on the satellite with a well-defined eye about 24 to 36 hours from now. Again, it's 986 millibar pressure, so it's not terribly strong, but it is moving into this area here. Warm water, low wind shear. There's not going to be a lot of wind shear to rip the storm apart. It's about 800 miles from the Florida coastline right now, and it's moving in that general direction. And the entire state of Florida is basically within this cone of uncertainty that we talk about, and I'll show you that in just a couple of minutes. Already, the storm is producing 20-foot waves right near the center. And these waves don't just disappear once they get out of the storm's realm. They just propagate for hundreds, even thousands of miles. So even along the beaches here in the tri-state area, we could be dealing with some rough rip currents and some high surf as we head deeper into the Labor Day weekend. And again, this storm moving over very warm water right up until landfall. In fact, as you get closer to landfall in Florida, it moves over the Gulf Stream. We literally have water temperatures, feel like a bathtub out there, in the upper 80s, and that's really like high octane fuel for these storms, and I think it does have a very good chance of strengthening right up through landfall. There have been a couple of hindrances to intensification during the past couple of days. There's been dry air, there's been some wind shear. We have less of that coming up, and the aircraft reconnaissance hurricane hunters, the pilots and the meteorologists on board, have been actually observing the environment around the storm, and they've been saying, watch out Florida, because it looks like this has a really good chance of intensifying a lot in this area right in here during the next few days. So let's check out the official National Hurricane Center forecast, and I encourage you, by the way, to ask questions because we'll be answering some of those questions live in just a few minutes. But the National Hurricane Center forecasting this to already be a major hurricane. Major hurricane status is Category 3 or higher. And we're predicting it to be a 115 mile per hour storm by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon out over the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The intensification doesn't end there, though. Watch what happens by 2 p.m. Saturday. All of a sudden, we're a high-end Category 3 storm, 125 miles per hour, and it's approaching the northern Bahamas by later Saturday and into the day on Sunday. It could potentially make an initial landfall in the northern Bahamas as a Category 4 storm on Sunday afternoon with winds about 130 miles per hour. That would be a catastrophic blow to the northern Bahamas. And look at that cone of uncertainty. That's really the potential track area. I don't want you to concentrate on that little hurricane icon there. Chances are it's not even going to follow that exact track. But within that shaded area, there's a very good chance that it will fall somewhere in there. But that can range, when this thing makes landfall, all the way from Jacksonville all the way down to the Florida Keys. So the entire east coast of Florida could potentially get a landfalling hurricane during the day on Monday. We just don't know exactly where that's going to happen at this point. As we get closer into Monday, that cone of uncertainty will get narrower and narrower. At this range, about 4 to 5 days out, it's about an average error of 200 miles in these track forecasts. So you're going to take the track forecast and go 200 miles on either side to get a reasonable estimate of where the storm could be, kind of the realm of where the storm could be. What's important here, still showing winds of 130 miles per hour potentially as it makes landfall on Monday, probably midday into the afternoon hours on Monday. If it makes landfall at an intensity that high along the east coast of Florida, that would actually be the strongest storm to make landfall on the Atlantic coast of Florida since Hurricane Andrew back in 1992. That was a Category 5 storm. We're not forecasting that in this case, but that had winds of 165 miles per hour. So we're talking about rarefied air of big storms here that we're heading into if this thing does actually make landfall as a Category 4 during the day on Monday. And then watch what happens. The forward speed of the storm slows down. I mean, it might be making landfall Monday and then it just barely moves inland by Tuesday at 2 p.m. That's a problem because the forward speed of the storm slows down. You're going to be dumping copious amounts of rainfall well inland from the potential devastation that occurs along the coast from the storm surge and the winds. And even by Tuesday at 2 p.m., we still could be dealing with a hurricane, even though it's weakening a little bit by that point. Looks like we have some questions coming in.
We have a couple of questions. So you mentioned the east coast of Florida.
Yes.
We have some concerns about both the west coast of Florida and then a viewer named Gloria has some friends and family in Louisiana. So I guess they're wanting to know west side and the Gulf.
Yeah. So some people were concerned about potentially the west coast of Florida, and somebody named Gloria was saying she has relatives in Louisiana. So as far as the west coast of Florida is concerned, it looks like this will make a landfall along the east coast of Florida, but it may move across the entire peninsula. So the west coast of Florida, somewhere along the Gulf Coast of Florida, can be affected by the storm. The good news for the west coast of Florida would be that the entire peninsula would kind of act as a buffer against the storm being super strong by the time it got to you. So it would move in at maximum intensity probably along the east coast and then weaken gradually as it moved across the state. And then in a weakened form, still could be a hurricane or a strong tropical storm, passes into the Gulf of Mexico. That's one scenario. And I wanted to show you this map here. If it keeps on chugging off to the west, there's going to be an eventual turn to the north. We're pretty sure of that, just based on the pattern that's going to be setting up into the early and middle part of next week. If the turn happens later, this can go into the Gulf of Mexico, and it can end up hitting, say, the Gulf Coast of Florida, or maybe even farther west toward a place like Louisiana, to answer Gloria's question. So there's a lot of different possibilities here. There's still a big range of tracks, especially as we go past that 5-day period. You saw how big the cone of uncertainty was at 5 days, covering basically the entire state of Florida. You can only imagine how big it gets if you go to days 6 and 7. But there should be some sort of turn to the north eventually. And in terms of weather around here, by the way, in the tri-state area, for now, it looks like the steering winds would shove any of the remnants off to our south. That's not a guarantee at this point, but whatever would happen with that, if it ever got up this far, it would be in a much weakened state.
Piggybacking off of that, Chris is asking if there's going to be additional rainfall. Can they expect more weather like that in Georgia and the Carolinas?
Chris was wondering if there's going to be additional rainfall in places like Georgia and the Carolinas, and I think there will be. I think in Florida, you'll probably receive 8 to 12 inches of rain just based on the track of this storm and how slowly it's going to be moving after it makes landfall. And then as it makes that turn off toward the north, and especially in a place like Georgia, in South Carolina, maybe even all the way into North Carolina, we could be dealing with some heavy rainfall into the early and middle part of next week. That part of the forecast is very uncertain. What we're more confident of is some sort of landfall along the Florida coast, perhaps even the southern Georgia coast during the day on Labor Day. What happens beyond that, pretty uncertain, but it's it'll be a tropical system with a lot of rainfall, copious amount of moisture, and it may eventually make a path off toward the north, toward Georgia and the Carolinas.
Viola, I believe she's commenting from Florida, and she's saying everything there is already sold out. So
yeah, Viola commenting from Florida, saying everything there is basically sold out. I'm sure the shelves are empty there. And, it's good that people are preparing. I'd want you, if you're in Florida, you have relatives in Florida, at least have an action plan in place. We're not going to know anything about specifics of what part of the Florida coast this is going to make landfall, probably until, say, late tomorrow night, Saturday morning at the earliest. At that point, at least the cone of uncertainty will be smaller. It's several hundred miles wide, covering the entire state of Florida right now. I think it'll be a tighter cone by that point.
And the last question, we've gotten a few of these. I think with the long holiday weekend, some people have plans to travel south, so they're concerned about flights in and out of Florida being canceled.
I'm sure there's going to be flights that'll be affected by this. And we talked about the other day cruise ship itineraries as well, already affected by Dorian. So definitely check ahead the next few days. And as we get closer to the event and we have more confidence as to where exactly this will make landfall along the Florida coast, we'll see what hubs, what airports will be affected the most. Just a few key takeaways from this storm. Again, may become a major hurricane tomorrow, Category 3 or higher. And keep sending in those questions. We're still here answering those live questions if you'd like. So we're looking at a Category 3 storm tomorrow over the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And then it continues to intensify, and there's an increasing likelihood of a direct hit on the Florida East Coast. Again, like I showed you before, the entire east coast of Florida within that cone of uncertainty. This thing could make landfall in Miami. It could make landfall in West Palm. It could make landfall on Vero Beach. It could make landfall at Jacksonville. Anywhere along the Florida coast has a chance at getting a landfalling hurricane at some point during the day on Labor Day. Right now, Labor Day looks like the most likely day for landfall. But here's an important point here. Wind and rainfall can arrive during the day on Sunday. So if you're in Florida and a watch gets issued, a hurricane watch, which may happen by later on tomorrow night, early Saturday morning, and it will probably be a reasonably smaller portion of the coastline than what we're showing now with that large cone of uncertainty. You're going to want to heed those evacuation orders quickly, because by Sunday we could be already dealing with tropical storm force conditions. We could be dealing with some of the outer rain squalls from the storm already kind of moving on shore by that point. And that's when it's really going to be bashing northern parts of the Bahamas during the day on Sunday, potentially as a Category 4 storm. Again, I want to show you the satellite picture again. 85 mile per hour sustained winds right now. It's moving northwest at about 13 miles per hour, still 800 miles from the coast of Florida. So we have many days to watch it, many days to hone in on exactly where this could be making landfall. Sarah, feel free to chime in if you get any more questions.
Michael's
Sure.
Asking, is there a storm behind Dorian that's projected to go up the coast toward our area?
No, right now there are no other areas of interest in the Atlantic Basin, thankfully. But we are heading into what is typically the most active time of the hurricane season. Typically, if you go back to climatology, go back through the record books, your best chance of getting a storm or two in the Atlantic Basin is right on September 10th. So you got to think that there'll be other storms kind of emerging off of the coast of Africa, clusters of thunderstorms, and then they can develop into tropical systems as they kind of traverse the waters of the Atlantic Ocean.
This is a question from Sean, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering similar things.
Sure.
He's just wondering, are we going to see any effects of this in the tri-state area?
Yeah, Sean wondering if we're going to see any effects on the tri-state area. Well, for sure at the beaches. I think as we head deeper and deeper into the Labor Day weekend, the waves emanating from this storm will be reaching the tri-state area. Right now, it's already generating 20-foot waves right around the center of Dorian. And those waves will just keep on propagating hundreds, and they can even propagate upwards of 1,000 miles away from the storm. So we will be getting high waves and rough rip currents around here as we head deeper into the holiday weekend, especially by Labor Day when the storm is closest to here. Even though it's going to be well off to our south, I think we'll be getting some high waves. In terms of getting rainfall from the storm, I think what will happen eventually, it will make a northward turn, but there's some winds coming in from the west over the tri-state area that may protect us from getting this thing coming up the coast as a tropical storm or just a remnant low with a lot of rainfall. And that may kind of force all that moisture out to sea off to our south. So we'll have to see what happens with that. That part of the forecast is very uncertain at this point, and I encourage you to keep it tuned right here, as that can change from day to day. One thing I just wanted to show you again, if you're just tuning in, this is the forecast from the National Hurricane Center, official forecast of the path of Dorian. Again, expected to become a major hurricane during the day tomorrow, Category 3, and strengthen even further as we head into the weekend. By Sunday at 2 p.m., possibly a Cat 4 heading into northern parts of the Bahamas. That could be 130 mile per hour sustained winds by then. Those are the winds right around the center of the storm. And then by Monday, that could be our potential landfall along the Florida East Coast. Again, there's that big cone of uncertainty. Anywhere along the east coast of Florida could see this thing making landfall. It's not only where the National Hurricane Center is predicting. We have, again, a couple hundred miles on either side is the average error at 4 to 5 days out. That's how long we have until this thing makes landfall. So there could be, there's a lot of uncertainty as we head, further and further in time. One thing we're pretty confident of, again, this will slow down once it makes landfall. All of our computer guidance is showing that, and that means it could dump copious amounts of rainfall, perhaps over a foot of rainfall over parts of Florida before this is all said and done. So it could be a multifaceted system where you get maybe a lot of damage along the coastline from the storm surge and from the winds, which could be Category 4 strength, just based on that current National Hurricane Center forecast. And then you get the second shot from the rainfall over the inland areas, maybe 1 foot, 1.5 feet of rain. And then after that, again, making a turn to the north. If it makes the earlier turn, we're just talking about it skimming the east coast of Florida and then heading up towards, say, South Carolina. If it makes a later turn, it goes clear across the state into the Gulf of Mexico and may affect places along the Gulf Coast. And then it moves north. And then just based on what we have here, based on the pattern that we're seeing, it would probably take a turn off to the east, a pretty rapid turn off to the east after that. And these steering winds may protect us in the tri-state area from getting any moisture from Dorian. But all bets are off after about 5 or 6 days. So definitely keep it tuned right here. Again, these takeaways, this might become a major hurricane tomorrow, increasing likelihood of that direct hit on the Florida coast, and the Labor Day landfall is most likely. But the wind and rain and even the tropical storm conditions can arrive as early as Sunday along the Florida East Coast. So I encourage you to keep it tuned to ABC7 NY right here. You can download the news app on the App Store and also on Google Play. And guess what? On Eyewitness News at 11 o'clock tonight, I'm going to be filling in for Lee Goldberg, and we'll have that latest 11 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. They will be updating the path. They will be updating the forecast intensity by that point. So I encourage you to tune in. If you have any more specific questions, you can always contact me personally on social media at Jeff Smith ABC7 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Have a great night.